She called me into the office on a Monday morning and told me to sit down. The chair across from her desk was new. Everything in that office was new. New furniture, new artwork, new nameplate on the door that said Vivian Holt, Managing Director. The office used to belong to my father. His name had been on that door for 26 years. She told me that the company was going in a new direction, that they needed people with fresh energy, that my skills were better suited to a different kind of role. Then she slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a redundancy notice, with my name on it. I picked it up. I read it. I set it back down. I said, "Thank you for letting me know, Vivian." She looked slightly surprised. She had expected tears, maybe, or anger. She had prepared for both. She got neither. Because what Vivian did not know, what nobody in that building knew except me, was that 3 weeks earlier I had been contacted by the largest property investment group in the country. And they wanted to buy Holt Property Group. All of it. And the only person who could make that deal happen, or stop it from happening, was me. My name is Jade Holt. My father is Edward Holt. He started Holt Property Group 26 years ago with my mother's life insurance money after she passed away from a stroke when I was 4 years old. He has told me that story exactly once, in a quiet voice, on the evening before I started university. He is not a man who talks about hard things easily, that I grew up inside that company the way some kids grow up inside churches or sports clubs. On school holidays, I sat in the corner of the main office doing my homework while the agents took calls. At weekends, I helped file papers. At 16, I was doing basic valuations on residential properties, walking through houses with a clipboard and my father's checklist, learning to look at a building the way he did, not just at what it was, but at what it could become. I studied property development at university. I came back and worked my way up properly, starting at the bottom the way my father insisted, because he believed you couldn't lead people through work you didn't understand yourself. By the time I was 26, I was heading the residential acquisitions division. By 28, I was on the senior leadership team. And then my father met Vivian. Vivian Holt, she took his name 9 months after they met, was 44 years old and had spent 15 years as a sales director at a commercial property firm across the city. She was sharp and well-dressed and very good at reading a room. She and my father met at an industry dinner. She told me later that she had recognized him from across the room and gone over to introduce herself. My father said she was the most confident person he had ever met. I met her for the first time 3 months into their relationship. We had dinner at a restaurant near the office. She asked good questions and listened carefully and said all the right things. After dinner, in the car on the way home, my father asked what I thought. I said she seemed very capable. He laughed and said, "That's exactly what she is." I remember thinking that capable was not the same as trustworthy. I did not say that out loud. I wish I had. They married 14 months after they met. Small ceremony. Close family only. My father was 61 by then. He had been talking about stepping back from the day-to-day running of the company for a couple of years. His knees had given him trouble since a fall on a site visit 2 winters before, and his doctor had been telling him to reduce his stress. 6 weeks after the wedding, he called a board meeting. He announced that Vivian would be taking over as managing director. He said she brought commercial experience the company needed at this stage of its growth. He said he would stay on as chairman, attending monthly, but the daily decisions would be Vivian's. The board approved it. Vivian had spent those 14 months of courtship building relationships with every one of them. She knew their names, their families, their professional histories. She had done her research. I sat in that meeting and said nothing. After it ended, I went back to my desk and looked at the residential acquisitions pipeline I had spent 3 years building. 11 properties under consideration. 4 in active negotiation. 2 about to exchange. I opened a new document and started keeping a private record of everything I had built. I don't know exactly why I did it that day. Only that something in me said, keep a record. My mother's instinct, maybe. She had been a woman who trusted paper. The changes came in stages. First, Vivian restructured the leadership team. She brought in 2 people from her previous company, a head of commercial development named Craig, who had worked under her for 8 years, and a finance director named Petra, who had handled her accounts at the old firm. She said the company needed external perspectives. That made sense on the surface. I said nothing. Then she shifted the company's focus away from residential acquisitions and toward commercial development. She said the margins were better. That was true. She also said the residential division was underperforming. That was not that I had figures to prove it. I put together a report and requested a meeting. She gave me 15 minutes. She listened with her hands folded on the desk, and then she said, "The strategy has been set, Jade. I need the team moving in the same direction." That was the moment I understood. This was not about strategy. This was about removing the parts of the company that were mine. I went home that evening and called the one person whose advice I trusted completely. A property lawyer named Samuel Osei, who had been my mother's personal legal advisor and who had worked with my father since the company's beginning. He was 68 years old, semi-retired, and one of the sharpest minds I had ever known. I told him everything. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Jade, I think it is time you looked very carefully at the original shareholder agreement." Samuel had a copy of everything. He always did. The Holt Property Group had been incorporated 26 years ago. At the time of incorporation, my father had set up the company with a shareholder structure that reflected what he had always intended, that the business would one day pass to his children. I was 4 years old when the company was formed. I did not have shares then, obviously. But my father had written a clause into the shareholder agreement that said any direct blood descendant of Edward Holt, upon reaching the age of 25 and having worked within the company for a minimum of 2 years, was entitled to claim a founding equity stake of 20%. I had turned 25 4 years ago. I had worked in the company for 6 years. I had never formally claimed the stake because nobody had ever told me to. Nobody had ever told me the clause existed. Samuel had known about it all along. He had been waiting, he said, to see if I would ever need it. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment. "Because I hoped you wouldn't need it," he said. "I was wrong to wait. I am sorry for that." I looked at the clause on my screen for a long time. 20% of Holt Property Group. That was not nothing. That was a seat at the table, a real one. The kind that could not be taken away with a redundancy notice. But I did not claim the stake immediately. Samuel and I talked through it carefully over 2 evenings. If I claimed it now, Vivian's legal team would fight it. They would say I had waited too long. They would say the clause had been superseded by updates to the company structure made in recent years. They would make it expensive and slow and public. I needed something more than the clause. I needed to understand the full picture of what Vivian had been doing since she became managing director. So I started looking. I asked Samuel to quietly pull together the company's registered filings from the past 18 months. Company filings are public documents. Anyone can request them. There is nothing unusual about a shareholder's representative reviewing them. What Samuel found took us both by surprise. In the 18 months since Vivian had taken over, 3 significant changes had been made to the company's registered documents. The shareholder agreement had been updated twice. The second update, filed 8 months ago, had quietly removed my father's original clause about blood descendants. Not altered, removed entirely. But Samuel had the original. Notarized. Filed privately. Untouched. And the removal of a notarized founding clause without the consent of all original parties was not legal. Vivian's lawyers had made an assumption. They had assumed that because my father had signed the update, his signature was on it, the original clause was gone. What they did not know was that the original agreement required the consent of all entitled parties, including me. Nobody had ever told me to consent, because nobody had ever told me the clause existed, which meant the removal was not valid. The phone call came on a Wednesday afternoon, 3 weeks after my redundancy notice. The number was from London. I almost didn't answer. The caller introduced himself as Marcus Webb. He was the acquisitions director for Pinnacle Capital Group, one of the largest property investment funds in the country. They had been watching Holt Property Group for 2 years. They believed it was significantly undervalued. They wanted to make an offer. He asked if I was still connected to the company. I said I was. He said their legal team had reviewed the company's shareholder structure and had found something interesting. A founding equity clause in the original agreement. They wanted to understand whether it was still active before proceeding with an offer, because if it was, any acquisition would require my agreement as well as my father's and Vivian's. I sat very still. It is still active, I said. There was a pause. That changes the conversation somewhat, Marcus Webb said. Yes, I said. It does. I called Samuel immediately after hanging up. He was not surprised. He said that serious acquisition groups always did thorough charter reviews before approaching. If Pinnacle Capital had found the clause, it meant their lawyers were serious people. We met the next morning. Samuel explained what my position now was. If Pinnacle Capital made a formal offer to acquire Holt Property Group, and if I held an active 20% equity stake, then my agreement was required for the deal to complete. No acquisition could proceed without my signature. Vivian had made me redundant, thinking she had removed me from the company entirely. She had done it quietly, efficiently, the way she did most things. What she had not done was check whether the clause she had removed from the public filing still existed in a private registry. It did. Samuel had made sure of that. I thought about the redundancy meeting, the new nameplate on her door, the way she had slid that paper across the desk expecting tears. Then I thought about my father sitting in his chairman's seat, believing she was building his company forward. I was going to let Vivian believe the deal was done. And then I was going to walk back in the door. The hardest part of the next 6 weeks was not the legal work. It was my father. He had called me after the redundancy to apologize. He said he hadn't known she was going to do it. That might have been true. His health had been declining since the winter. He tired more easily. He had stepped back further than he originally planned, and Vivian managed most of what came across his desk before it reached him. We met for lunch. He looked smaller than I remembered. That frightened me more than anything Vivian had done. I told him I was fine. I told him I was exploring some opportunities. I did not tell him about Samuel or the clause or the Pinnacle call. He held my hand across the table and said, "This is still your company, Jade. You know that." I looked at him. "I know, Dad," I said. He nodded slowly, like he was reassuring himself as much as me. I drove home with my hands tight on the wheel. I needed to move carefully, not just for myself, for him. Whatever happened next could not damage him. He was the reason I was protecting the company, not the building, not the balance sheets, but the thing he had built with my mother's memory and 26 years of early mornings and stubborn belief. That was worth protecting. And I was going to protect it properly. Pinnacle Capital submitted their formal offer 6 weeks after our first phone call. It was a significant number. I will not say exactly, but it was the kind of number that changes rooms when it enters them. Their offer valued Holt Property Group at considerably more than the company's current market estimate, because Pinnacle had looked at the underlying asset quality, the land holdings, and the residential pipeline, and seen what Vivian had been shutting down. The offer went to the board first, then to Vivian as managing director. I made a decision. I was going to let the Pinnacle offer move forward. I was going to let it get all the way to the final stage. Then Pinnacle's lawyers sent a formal letter to Vivian's legal team noting that a 20% founding stake existed in favor of Jade Holt, and that her consent was required before any acquisition could be finalized. I know exactly when Vivian received that letter, because she called me 40 minutes later. The number on my phone said private. I answered anyway. She did not say hello. "What have you done?" she said. Her voice was different from the one she used in the office. Controlled, still, but different underneath. Like something was working very hard to hold itself together. "I haven't done anything," I said. The clause was already there. Samuel just made sure it was still standing. A short silence. "Samuel Osei," she said. "He was my mother's lawyer," I said. "He's been keeping the original documents since before I was born." The silence that followed was longer. Vivian called me 3 more times over the next 4 days. The first call was still controlled. She said she wanted to find a resolution that worked for everyone. She said she was willing to discuss a financial arrangement. She used words like practical and mature and moving forward together. I said I would think about it. The second call was less controlled. She said that my clause had been legally removed with my father's signature, that Samuel's private copy carried no weight, and that her lawyers were confident they could have it struck out in court. She said pursuing this would cost me more than I had and take longer than I could wait. I said I would think about it. The third call, she did not speak for several seconds after I answered. Then she said, "What do you want, Jade?" That was the question I had been waiting for. "I want the same thing my father has always wanted," I said. "For this company to be protected. For the people who built it to be treated fairly. And for the deals that get made in its name to be made honestly." A pause. "That's not an answer," she said. "I think it is," I said. I ended the call. Samuel and I met with Pinnacle Capital's lead team the following Tuesday. Marcus Webb was in his mid-50s, calm, with the manner of someone who had been in difficult negotiations many times and found them more interesting than stressful. He brought 2 lawyers and a financial analyst. I brought Samuel. That was all I needed. We sat across a conference table in a hotel meeting room, and Marcus laid out the offer clearly. Pinnacle wanted to acquire the full company. They valued the residential pipeline in particular, the 11 properties I had spent 3 years building, as the most attractive part of the portfolio. He confirmed that under the active founding clause, my 20% stake meant my agreement was required. Without it, the deal could not complete. Their lawyers had been clear with Vivian's team on this point. Then Marcus leaned forward slightly. "Miss Holt, I want to be direct with you. We are not simply looking to acquire this company and run it as it is. We want the right leadership in place. We've reviewed the company's performance by division over the last 3 years. The residential acquisitions division has significantly outperformed everything else. We know who built that division." He looked at me. "We'd like you to stay on," he said. "Not as an employee, as a partner." I had not expected that. I kept my face still. "What kind of partner?" I asked. "The kind with a retained stake and a seat on the new board," he said. Samuel, beside me, said nothing. But I heard him set down his pen very slowly, which was his way of saying, "This is the moment. Think carefully." I thought carefully, Marcus agreed. He was a patient man. That week I did 3 things. First, I went to see my father. Alone, without telling Vivian. I told him everything. The clause. Samuel's files. The Pinnacle offer. What my position was, and what it meant. He listened without interrupting, which is how he always listened to serious things. When I finished, he closed his eyes for a moment. Then he said, "I should have told you about the clause years ago. That was my mistake." "Why didn't you?" I asked. "Because I was going to tell you when I stepped back," he said. "I thought there was more time. And then everything moved fast and I trusted that Vivian was." He stopped. I stopped paying attention to the right things. He looked at his hands. "What would you like to do?" he asked. Not telling me. Asking me. The way he used to ask when I was 12 and had a problem I needed to work through myself. "I want to protect what you built," I said. "But I don't want to destroy the company doing it. The Pinnacle offer is the right deal at the right value. The problem is who controls the outcome." He nodded slowly. "Then make sure the right people do," he said. Second, I had Samuel send a formal legal notice to Vivian's team. The notice stated that as the holder of an active founding equity stake, I was formally objecting to the removal of the original clause from the company's registered documents. It stated that the removal had been made without my knowledge or consent, in violation of the terms of the original shareholder agreement. It requested that the original clause be reinstated in the public registry within 14 days. It also stated that if the matter was not resolved within that period, I reserve the right to apply to the court to have all shareholder agreement amendments made in the past 18 months reviewed for validity. Vivian's lawyers received the notice on a Thursday morning. By Thursday afternoon, they had requested an urgent meeting. Samuel declined. I asked for 1 week to consider. Beginning. The other was a chartered accountant named Miriam, who had guided the company's financial reporting through 3 economic downturns. I asked to meet both of them separately. I told them what I had found. I showed them the documents. Gerald was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I signed that shareholder update 8 months ago. I was told it was an administrative change. I did not know what was being removed." Miriam said, "I should have read it more carefully. That is on me. What do you need from us?" "I need you to support a board motion," I said. "When the time comes." "You'll have it," Gerald said. "You'll have it," Miriam said. The board meeting was called for a Wednesday morning, 11 days after Samuel's legal notice. It had been called by Vivian, which was her right as managing director. She wanted to address the legal situation arising from recent shareholder correspondence. That was how the agenda described it. I attended as an equity stakeholder. Vivian had not been able to exclude me. The clause was very clear on that point. I arrived early. Samuel was with me. Gerald and Miriam were already seated when we walked in. Vivian entered with Craig and Petra, not board members, but she had brought them as support. Her lawyer sat beside her. She looked at me across the table. It was the first time I had seen her since the redundancy meeting. She looked composed. She always looked composed. It was her greatest skill. She opened the meeting and began to explain that there was an unresolved legal question regarding a historic shareholder clause that needed to be addressed before the Pinnacle acquisition could move forward. Then Gerald raised his hand. He said we were happy to communicate in writing. Their written response arrived the next day. It was long and used a great many words to say very little that was actually useful. What it did not do was provide a legal argument against the core point Samuel had made. Because there wasn't one. Third, I reached out to the two longest-serving members of the Holt Property Group board. They were both men who had worked with my father for more than 15 years. One was a retired property developer named Gerald, who had been on the board since almost the beginning. The other was a chartered accountant named Miriam, who had guided the company's financial reporting through 3 economic downturns. I asked to meet both of them separately. I told them what I had found. I showed them the documents. Gerald was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I signed that shareholder update 8 months ago. I was told it was an administrative change. I did not know what was being removed. Miriam said, I should have read it more carefully. That is on me. What do you need from us? I need you to support a board motion, I said. When the time comes. You'll have it, Gerald said. You'll have it, Miriam said. The board meeting was called for a Wednesday morning, 11 days after Samuel's legal notice. It had been called by Vivian, which was her right as managing director. She wanted to address the legal situation arising from recent shareholder correspondence. That was how the agenda described it. I attended as an equity stakeholder. Vivian had not been able to exclude me. The clause was very clear on that point that I arrived early. Samuel was with me. Gerald and Miriam were already seated when we walked in. Vivian entered with Craig and Petra, not board members, but she had brought them as support. Her lawyer sat beside her. She looked at me across the table. It was the first time I had seen her since the redundancy meeting. She looked composed. She always looked composed. She always looked composed. It was her greatest skill. She opened the meeting and began to explain that there was an unresolved legal question regarding a historic shareholder clause that needed to be addressed before the Pinnacle acquisition could move forward. Then Gerald raised his hand. I'd like to put a motion to the board, he said. Vivian paused. The motion, Gerald said, is that the board formally acknowledge that the amendment to the shareholder agreement made 8 months ago, specifically the removal of the founding equity clause, was made without full and proper disclosure to all relevant parties, and that the board requests the clause be restored to the company's registered documents immediately. Vivian looked at him, then at Miriam. I second the motion, Miriam said. Vivian's lawyer leaned toward her and said something quietly. She listened. Then she looked up. This motion is premature, she said. The legal question is still being reviewed. The legal question has been reviewed, Samuel said. It was the first time he had spoken. His voice was calm and exact. The original clause was notarized on the date of incorporation. It required the consent of all entitled parties for any amendment. That consent was never sought. The removal is not valid in law. That is not an opinion. That is settled property law. Silence. Vivian's lawyer did not respond. He was a good enough lawyer to know when there was nothing to say. Gerald called for the vote. 3 in favor. Vivian and her 2 external board members against. The motion passed. After the vote, Vivian asked for a short break, that I said yes. I got up and walked to the window at the far end of the room and looked out at the street below. The morning traffic was clearing. It was going to be a clear day. Samuel came and stood beside me. How do you feel? He asked quietly. I thought about it, Steady, I said. Which is strange. It is not strange, he said. It is what preparation feels like when the moment arrives. You did not come here angry. You came here ready. He went back to his seat. I stayed at the window for another moment. I thought about my father at that lunch table, looking smaller than I remembered, holding my hand and saying, "This is still your company." He had been right. He just hadn't known how right. When the meeting resumed, Vivian's manner had changed. Not dramatically. She was too controlled for that. But the edge was gone. Something had settled in her that looked less like authority and more like calculation. The look of someone working out their next move rather than directing the one they were already on. She proposed a negotiated resolution. Her team would formally restore the founding clause. In return, she asked that no further legal action be taken regarding the amendment and that her role as managing director remain in place through the Pinnacle acquisition process. I listened to the whole thing. Then I looked at Samuel. He gave a small nod. "The clause will be restored," I said. "I am also open to not pursuing further legal action over the amendment, provided full disclosure is made to the board regarding all changes to registered documents in the past 18 months. Every change. With explanation." Vivian nodded. "As for the managing director role," I said, "that is a board decision. I will not try to influence it outside of this room." That was the truth. I genuinely would not. Because I already knew what the board would decide once they saw the full disclosure. I did not need to push. I just needed to make sure the right information was in the room. The full disclosure took 2 weeks to compile. Every document change. Every amended filing. Every board resolution passed in the past 18 months, with explanation and original drafts. The board reviewed it over 2 sessions. What they found was not fraud. I want to be accurate about that. Vivian had not stolen money or falsified accounts. What she had done was something more subtle. She had reshaped the company to concentrate power in her hands. The shareholder amendment was part of it. The hiring of Craig and Petra was part of it. The shift away from residential acquisitions, which was my division, was part of it. It was a methodical, careful consolidation of control, which was not illegal. But it was exactly what Gerald and Miriam had not understood they were signing off on. They had been given pieces of the picture, never the whole view. After the second review session, Gerald called me. "We're going to recommend to the full board that Vivian's role be restructured," he said. "She will move to a commercial advisory position. The managing director role will go to an open recruitment process." A pause. "We'd like you to put your name forward," he said. I did not say yes immediately. That mattered to me. I said I would think about it overnight and give him an answer in the morning. He said that was fine. I drove to my father's house that evening. I let myself in with my key. He had always kept a key cut for me, even through everything. He was in the kitchen making tea, moving slowly but steadily. I sat at the kitchen table and told him what had happened. The board vote. The disclosure. Gerald's call. He set 2 mugs down and sat across from me. He didn't say anything for a long moment. He looked at his tea. "Is it what you want?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "But I want to make sure it is right, not just what I want." "There's a difference." He looked up at me then. "That is exactly the right thing to think," he said. "Your mother used to say that. She used to say the test of a good decision is whether you would still make it if nobody was watching." I would still make it if nobody was watching. "Then you have your answer," he said. I called Gerald the next morning and said yes. The board process moved quickly. There were 2 other candidates, both external, both experienced. The process was proper, and I was glad of that. I did not want the role handed to me. I wanted to earn it the same way I had earned every other step. The presentation I gave the board lasted 40 minutes. I talked about the residential pipeline and what it was worth if properly developed. I talked about a 3-year plan for the company. I talked about what I believed Holt Property Group stood for and what I intended to protect. At the end, Gerald asked one question. "Why does this company matter to you?" I said, "Because my father built it with the money my mother left behind, because she never got to see it, and because I have spent my whole life learning it from the inside. It is not just a business to me. It is a responsibility." 3 days later, Gerald called with the result. I was appointed managing director of Holt Property Group. Unanimous. Vivian did not attend the announcement meeting. She sent a brief email to the board saying she wished the company well and would fulfill her advisory agreement as contracted. It was professional. I respected that, even if I did not particularly feel warmth toward it. After the announcement, I called a staff meeting. The whole company, about 40 people in the main office, a few dialing in from sites around the city, that I told them plainly what had happened. That there had been a period of uncertainty at the leadership level. That it was resolved. That the Pinnacle acquisition was proceeding and that their jobs were secure. Pinnacle had made that commitment in writing as part of the deal terms, which I had insisted on. I told them that Holt Property Group had been built by a man who believed in doing things carefully and doing them right. That was still the standard. A woman near the back of the room, she had been with the company for 12 years, handling property management, raised her hand. "Does this mean the residential division is coming back?" she asked. "Yes," I said. It never should have gone. The room changed when I said that. Not loudly. Just a small settling, like something had been returned to where it belonged. The Pinnacle acquisition completed 6 weeks later. It was a significant moment for the company, and I want to be honest about how it felt. Complicated. Not unhappy. The deal was the right one, the value was right, the terms were right. But there is something strange about signing the paperwork that formally changes the name above your door, even when you know it is the correct thing. My father came to the signing. He sat at the table in his good suit, and he watched me sign my name beside his and beside Marcus Webb's. When it was done, Marcus shook his hand first. "You built something worth acquiring," Marcus said. "That is not common." My father shook his hand and said thank you and didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. Afterward, just the two of us in the car park, he turned to me. 26 years, he said. "It's not gone," I said. "It's just in better hands now." Including mine. He put his arm around my shoulders, the way he used to when I was small, and had done something he was proud of. We stood there for a moment in the car park in the morning sun. That was enough. That was exactly enough. My first week as managing director, I did something that was not on any agenda. I called Samuel Osei and asked him to come into the office. He came on a Thursday morning, dressed in the same careful way he always dressed, carrying the worn briefcase he had carried for 30 years. I met him at the front door and walked him up to what was now my office. He stood in the doorway and looked around. Then he said, "Your father sat in that chair for 26 years. I nodded. "I know," I said. "I sat in it last night after everyone had gone home, just to see how it felt." And he asked. "Like a responsibility," I said. "Which is exactly how it should feel." He smiled. It was a slow, careful smile, the kind that doesn't appear often. I gave him a formal letter of appointment as the company's retained legal advisor. His previous role had ended when Vivian had brought in her own team. I was not going to let that stand. He read the letter slowly. Then he folded it and placed it in his briefcase. "Your mother would be pleased," he said. "That is the best thing you could say to me," I told him. The residential division was re-established within my first month. The 11 properties that had been paused in the pipeline were reactivated. 3 of them had dropped in value during the delay. That stung, but it was recoverable. The other 8 were in strong positions. 2 exchanged within 6 weeks of the restart. I also looked at what Craig and Petra had been doing in commercial development. This is where I want to be fair. Some of it was good work. 2 of the commercial projects Vivian had initiated were genuinely strong deals. I kept both of them running. Craig left. He had come with Vivian, and his position was tied to hers. Petra stayed. She was a capable finance director, and she had done nothing wrong. She was just doing her job. That I do not believe in removing people who have done nothing wrong. That would make me no different from what I had been pushed out by. What I believe in is making sure the right people are in the right places, doing work they understand and care about, in a company that is honest about what it is. That is what I was trying to build. Nothing more complicated than that. 4 months after the acquisition completed, Pinnacle Capital held a formal welcome event for Holt Property Group. It was held in a large event space in the city center. Industry contacts, investors, press. About 100 people. Marcus Webb gave a speech. He talked about what had attracted Pinnacle to the company. He mentioned the residential pipeline specifically. He said that one of the things that had impressed them most was the quality of the in-house work that had been done, largely by people who had been with the company for years. Then he introduced me. I stood at the microphone in front of 100 people, and I felt the exact same thing I always feel in front of rooms, that I would rather be somewhere quiet doing the actual work. But I also knew that sometimes you have to stand in front of the room. Sometimes that is part of the work. I talked about my father. I talked about what the company had been built for. I talked about what I intended to keep and what I intended to grow. I kept it short. At the back of the room, my father was sitting in a chair someone had found for him. He was not clapping with everyone else. He was just watching. His eyes bright. That was worth more than all of it. People have asked me what I thought of Vivian. Whether I hated her. Whether watching things unfold the way they did felt like revenge. Did I want to answer that honestly? Vivian was not a stupid woman. She was actually very intelligent and very organized, and in another situation, I think I might have respected her. What she lacked was something that cannot be learned from experience or taught in a boardroom. She did not understand what the company meant. She saw its value. She understood its market position. But she thought of it as a thing to be optimized, not a thing that carried something. She thought my attachment to it was sentiment, and that sentiment was weakness.
She was wrong about that.
Sentiment is not weakness. Knowing what a thing is worth beyond its price is not weakness. Caring about the people inside a company because your father built it on a foundation of loss and love and 26 years of work, that is not weakness. That is the whole point. If she had understood that, she would have been managing director of a company going from strength to strength. Instead, she is an advisor on a 1-year contract that will not be renewed. That I do not say that with satisfaction. Only with clarity. 6 months into my role, I started a mentorship program inside the company. I called it the Foundation Program. The idea was simple. Identify people inside the company who had knowledge and skill that was not being fully used and give them a structured path to grow into senior roles. The woman who had asked about the residential division at the staff meeting, her name was Adiz, she had been running property management for 12 years, was the first person I approached. I asked her if she had ever wanted to move into acquisitions. She looked at me for a moment like she was checking whether I was serious.
I trained for it, she said.
Years ago. But there was never a route. There is now, I said. 6 months later, Adiz made her first solo residential acquisition, a mixed-use development on the edge of the city that I'd spotted in the pipeline but held back because I wanted her to have it. She came into my office the day it exchanged. She stood in the doorway and just looked at me. "Thank you," she said. "This is what the company is for," I said. My father's health improved slowly over the months that followed. Not back to how he had been, but steadier. His doctor said the reduction in stress was part of it. He and Vivian's separation finalized quietly. He did not speak about it much. He is not a man who speaks about hard things easily. What he did do was start coming into the office again. Not to work. Just to sit in the small meeting room off the main floor, not his old office, which was mine now, and have his morning tea and read the industry papers. Some mornings I would go in and sit with him for 20 minutes before the day started. We didn't always talk about anything important. Sometimes we just sat there with our teas and looked out at the city. Those 20 minutes were the best part of my day. One morning he said, "You know what I think about in here?"
"What?"
I asked. "The first year," he said. "When it was just me and 2 other people in a small office and no idea whether any of it would work. Your mother's money in the account and a list of properties I wanted to look at." He paused. "She would have loved this," he said. "Watching you here." I looked at my tea. "I hope so," I said. 1 year after the acquisition, Pinnacle Capital held a review of all their subsidiary companies. Holt Property Group was assessed against 9 other companies in the portfolio. The assessment looked at financial performance, pipeline quality, staff retention, and strategic positioning. We ranked first. Marcus Webb called me personally to share the result. He said, "I want to talk to you about what comes next." What came next was a proposal to expand. Pinnacle wanted to use the Holt residential model as the blueprint for a new division covering 3 other cities. They wanted me to lead it. I asked for 2 weeks to think. What I was really doing was making sure the company was stable enough to handle me taking on more without anything slipping. I spent those 2 weeks making sure Adiz was ready to carry more responsibility, making sure Petra had everything she needed, making sure the team was solid. When I said yes to Marcus, it was because I was sure the ground was ready to hold the weight. That is how my father always built things. From a good foundation. It is the only way I know. Samuel Osei retired properly about 8 months after I became managing director. His retirement was not the kind where someone drifts away slowly. He set a date, he finished everything cleanly, and he handed over his files and his knowledge in a series of 3 long afternoons sitting in my office going through every document that mattered. On his last afternoon, at the end, he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder.
"This is yours," he said.
"It has always been yours." Inside was a copy of the original shareholder agreement. The clause highlighted in yellow, the way it had been when he had first shown it to me in his office. And behind it, a letter, handwritten, on the stationery her family had used since before I was born. My mother's stationery. The letter was addressed to me. It was dated the year I was born. My father had not known Samuel was keeping it. My mother had given it to him privately to be passed to me when the time was right. I will not share what it said. Some things belong to you alone. But I will say this. She knew. She knew who I would be. She knew what I would face. And she had made sure, in the only way she could, that I would have what I needed when I needed it. I think about my mother often, more now than before, which surprised me at first. I thought that as the company became more secure and more mine, I would think about her less, that the urgency would fade. It went the other way. The more solid the ground became, the more I felt her in it. In the careful way Samuel used to organize a document. In the clause she had written before I could read. In the letter she had left for the right moment. She was not a woman who left things to chance. She was a woman who trusted paper, who planned ahead, who made sure the people she loved would be protected. I have tried to be the same. Not in a hard way. Not in a way that closes people out. But in a way that says, I have thought about this carefully. I have checked the foundations. Whatever I build here, I have built properly. That is her in me. That is what she left behind that no one could take away. Not the money. The mind. I want to say something about what it means to be pushed out of something that is yours. Because I hear from people, more now since some of this has become known, who have had the same thing happen to them. A family business. A parent who remarried. A spouse who shifted power slowly and quietly until one day you found yourself outside the door with a letter saying your services were no longer required. What I want to say to those people is this. The paper matters. Whatever your parents built, whatever was meant for you, whatever was promised, get it in writing. Find the original documents. Find the lawyer who was there at the beginning. Do not assume that because something was intended, it is protected. Intention is not protection. Paper is protection. And if you find that someone has quietly removed your name from the paper, look harder. Look in the private registries. Look in the original notarized copies. Look in the files of the careful, patient people who were there at the beginning and who kept copies of everything. Your name is still somewhere. Someone put it there for a reason. Find it. I am 30 years old. I am the managing director of what is now called Holt Residential, Pinnacle Capital Group, the expanded residential division covering 4 cities, with 22 active projects and a team of 61 people. My father has a good chair in the small meeting room and tea every morning and the industry papers and 20 minutes with me when the day starts. Samuel Osei is retired and well and calls me on the first Monday of every month, which is a habit we developed during the hard period and which neither of us has seen any reason to stop. Adiz now leads the original Holt residential team and is the best acquisitions manager the company has ever had. I tell her that regularly. She tells me I am biased because I trained her. I tell her that is not a counterargument. In my office, on the wall behind my desk, I have one framed document. It is a copy of the original shareholder agreement. Section 4, Clause 9, highlighted in yellow. The founding equity clause. My name, printed clearly, as the entitled heir. People ask about it sometimes. I tell them it is a reminder that the most powerful thing a person can do is plan carefully for the people they love, Even when, especially when, they will not be there to see it. My mother could not be here. But she is in that clause. She is in this office. She is in every building this company acquires and every person it gives a route forward to. She built carefully. She trusted paper. She left my name in the right place.
Everything else followed from that.
She told me to build my own path. She was right. I built it right through the middle of hers. And I named it after my father.